Welcome to Tom's True Crime. Today we take you to South Beach, Florida. South Beach, located in the heart of Miami Beach, Florida, is an amazing destination known for its beautiful white sand beaches. Famous for its pastel-colored buildings, trendy boutiques, and world-class restaurants, South Beach attracts visitors from all over the world. The area offers a dynamic mix of cultural influences, with a thriving art scene and a melting pot of cuisines. Ocean Drive, the main thoroughfare, is lined with palm trees and bustling outdoor cafes, while the nearby beach provides a scenic backdrop for sunbathers, joggers, and those seeking the warm, turquoise waters of the Atlantic Ocean. On the evening of February 12, 2023, a black Jeep stopped in a parking lot by the beach. Music was playing softly in the car. Two men and three girls were talking passionately about general topics. They looked like longtime friends who had met for a fun outing. All the passengers got out of the car and walked leisurely towards the beach. Michael Nelletti held Emily Garvoss' hand. He whispered something in her ear. She then called out to her friends that she would come back later. Michael and Emily hurriedly got into the car and talked for a long time. Michael stroked Emily's long hair, touched her plump lips. He kisses them. A few hours later, Emily returned home and went to bed. The next morning, her mother noticed that her daughter had not come to breakfast. She went to her daughter's room and knocked on the door, hoping that the knock would wake her up, but she was met with silence. The woman entered the room. Then she screamed. At the scream, the girl's father came running in. A terrible picture appeared before the parents. The whole bed was flooded with blood, and in the bathroom on the floor, in a pool of blood, lay their daughter. She was dead. From what they saw, the couple's legs gave out, but the father found the strength to call the police. Around 8 a.m., police arrived at the scene, examined the girl's room, interviewed the parents. The body was taken to the medical examiners to establish the cause of death. The parents cried and wondered what could have happened to their daughter at home at night. But unfortunately, the events preceding this tragedy began to develop much earlier and escaped the parents' eyes. 16-year-old Emily Garvoss was born on July 23, 2006 to David and Martha, who were restaurant owners. She grew up in a happy family, had an older sister with whom she was very close. Emily grew up to be a very pretty and bright girl. She loved to sing, dance, and displayed her special artistry, which she was proud to show in videos for social media. In 2023, Emily was in her senior year of high school and was planning to go to university. She was always surrounded by friends because the girl's cheerfulness attracted not only her peers to her. 35-year-old Michael Nelletti was among Emily's close friends. Michael was a teacher. The pupils took a great liking to Michael Nelletti as he treated them like friends and had regular outings outside of school. Despite the fact that Michael was married to another teacher and had two daughters, he devoted most of his free time to his students. For a long time, Michael Nelletti painstakingly built a trusting relationship with them. They were mostly bright and beautiful students, such as Emily. The evening walk on February 12, 2023, was a perfectly normal meeting of teacher and female students outside of school. Emily was the last person Michael picked up that evening. He followed her into the house. He introduced himself as a teacher and promised to bring her back home. The group of two men and three young female students then headed to the beach in Michael Nelletti's car. After stopping, everyone got out of the car except Michael and Emily. Michael and Emily were alone for a while, but afterward joined the group. They drank a few beers and took a short walk along the beach. Suddenly, Emily felt sick. She started bleeding. The walk had to be cut short, and she had to be brought back home. In the morning, her parents found her dead. An autopsy revealed that it was a homicide, but the parents did not get answers to their questions. The medical examiners tentatively determined that Emily Garvoss' death was due to a perineal laceration with severe internal bleeding and hemorrhagic shock following a violent act. As a result of the autopsy, Emily's death was classified as a violent death of undetermined cause. But who did such a thing when Emily was with friends? Interviews with the girlfriends and a review of the seized phones provided clarity and identified the first suspect. The testimony of one of the girls, who had been out with Michael Nelletti and Emily that evening, was shocking. She said she saw Michael Nelletti slip 5 pills into Emily's drink while they were on the beach. There was a lot of speculation in the community about the cause of Emily's death. Some said she died of a heart attack, and some were sure she died from blood loss caused by the pills Michael had given her. Everyone hoped that the medical examiner's report would put an end to the rumors and speculation. However, all the speculation dissipated when the results of the forensic examination came in. Upon learning the forensic examination, which ruled out the possibility of pregnancy, Emily's relatives were clearly puzzled and very skeptical. The victim's relatives stated that the family was unhappy that the report ruled out Emily's pregnancy, because this theory best matched what investigators had found out based on the forensic examiner's tests and findings, as well as the evidence collected during the investigation. After all, a review of the phones of Emily's friends revealed many text messages that, although indirectly, but indicated Michael Nelletti's long-term interest in the student. After the unsuccessful version of pregnancy, the investigation concluded that Michael drugged the girl without her consent and roughly abused her on the beach, which led to profuse blood loss and a few hours later to the death of Emily. The results of repeated toxicology tests were pending. Michael Nelletti and his alleged accomplice, Brian Smith, were the main suspects in Emily's death. Further interviews with witnesses about Emily's death. After several interrogations, authorities learned that due to severe bleeding, the people Emily was with that night had to stop several times along the way to help her, but no one took the bleeding Emily to the hospital or called emergency services. Some of these stops were captured by surveillance cameras where, according to witnesses, Michael and Brian bought alcoholic beverages and Emily and Michael went into the restroom together. Later, they also went into the pharmacy to buy medicine, water, and feminine hygiene pads. It was later established that Emily had to completely change her clothes at one of the stops because her own were completely soaked in blood. After Emily was taken home, her parents also noticed that she was bleeding heavily and thinking it was a woman's cycle. The mother simply gave her painkiller to make her fall asleep. It was learned from one of the girls' cell phones that Emily had sent her an audio message in the early morning hours asking for help and saying, "Please help me, I'm bleeding." But unfortunately, the friend listened to the help recording too late. The next day, Emily was found dead on the floor of her bathroom in a pool of blood. On February 14th, Michael Nelletti was questioned by police, and his home was searched a day later, during which the clothes he was wearing that night while out with his female students were seized. His cousin, the other man with the girls that night, Brian Smith, was also accused of trying to hide Michael's bloody pants. There are many ambiguities in the investigation into the event. The public demanded a quality investigation to find out the real cause of the young girl's death. Many felt that the obvious facts that were on the surface had not been taken into account by the investigation. This involved not only a search of the house where Michael Nelletti and his family lived, but also the car in which the crime against Emily may have taken place, which triggered the bleeding. The car was urgently requested by the authorities, but as it turned out, it was sold in a hurry by Michael's wife. The investigation believed that such a hasty sale of the car was a fact of hiding evidence that could prove violent acts. The purchaser of the car was Lucas King. After it was learned that charges would be sought for alleged complicity in the case against Diana, Michael's wife, and Lucas King, who was the new owner of the car was finally inspected. But other than traces of blood that belonged to Emily in the car, no other evidence was found. The court ruling determined that there was not enough evidence to keep Diana in jail, and she was released. The investigation continued for several months. The prosecutor launched his own investigation and re-interviewed the 3 girls who accompanied Emily, testimony that helped investigators reconstruct the events of that night minute by minute. At 7:30 p.m., Michael Nelletti, 35, and his cousin Brian Smith went to the home of Emily Garvoss with 3 other girls in the passenger seats of the car. Michael, introducing himself to Emily's mother as her teacher and telling her the exciting evening that awaited Emily and the other students. Emily left her house with Michael. It turned out that originally, the whole group was going to go to the fair with amusement rides, but on the way, Michael changed his mind and changed the destination. Most likely, Michael did not intend to go to the fair. On the way to the beach, Michael stopped the car at a store where he bought a beer, and returned to the car. He asked Brian to sit in the back seat while Emily sat in the front. The man had a thermos with him into which he poured the beer and added 5 unknown pills to the drink. He offered it to Emily without informing her of the contents of the thermos, but it was noticed by one of the girlfriends. Arriving at the beach, the 3 others got out of the car, leaving Emily and Michael alone. They were alone in the car for about 30 minutes, and of course their prolonged absence was noticed by Emily's friends as well. After a moment without explanation, Michael appeared and told everyone to get in the car as they were leaving urgently. They had to make several stops along the way because Emily started bleeding heavily. One of the stops was at 9:45 p.m. when they stopped at a gas station parking lot where, According to eyewitnesses and CCTV footage, Emily used the restroom. Emily's classmates said she asked to stop at the gas station because she needed to visit the ladies' room, and when she went in there with her friends, they noticed her clothes were soaked with blood. There was a lot of blood in the restroom, so much so that the girls had to mop the floor. The girlfriends tried to help Emily. They were very frightened and asked the woman working at the gas station if it was normal, and she said it was not normal and advised them to see a doctor immediately. The girls told Michael about it, but he refused to go to the hospital, saying that if he did, he would go to jail. According to the investigation files, traces of Emily Garvoss blood were found both in the parking lot and in the restroom at the gas station. They also stopped at a pharmacy at 10:25 p.m., where they bought some medication, water, and sanitary pads. Authorities obtained surveillance footage and a receipt for the purchase to verify the facts. At 11 p.m., Michael returned Emily to her home. She arrived with heavy bleeding that began minutes after she was left alone in the car with Michael. On February 16th, an official report came back stating that the girl had been very severely and brutally abused, resulting in severe blood loss and hypovolemic shock. As scary as it sounds, this condition could have been stabilized and medical personnel could have saved Emily, but unfortunately, Emily was never taken to doctors that night. Toxicology testing confirmed the presence in Emily's body of the active ingredient in the pills used to terminate a pregnancy, but was previously confirmed that Emily was never pregnant. This pills Emily was given had contraceptive effects. When taken orally in the recommended dosing regimen, this component suppresses ovulation and fertilization, which most likely indicates that Michael was preparing for intimacy with the student he liked. After repeated medical examinations, Emily's body was finally allowed to be buried. Emily's family and friends said goodbye to her. They described her as a kind and cheerful girl. Her parents bitterly recalled that fateful evening and blamed themselves for entrusting their daughter to Michael. On June 4, 2023, after reconstructing the last hours of Emily Garvoss' life, prosecutors filed charges against Michael Nelletti. On June 12, the prosecutor's office filed an indictment and a request to open a trial against Michael Nelletti and his cousin Brian Smith. The trial of Michael Nelletti in the death of Emily Garvoss began on February 1, 2024. At trial, the defense attorney urged the court to note that the parents of Emily Garvoss did not take any action to avoid the death of their daughter, knowing about her problem. The prosecution, for its part, presented more than 40 pieces of evidence, including witness testimony and examination reports. During the hearing, the prosecution also heard testimony from pathologists and forensic experts who showed the audience all the audio and video materials that had been collected during the painstaking and detailed investigation to determine the cause of Emily's death. In his closing statement, the defendant tried to make himself look like a victim. Michael Nelletti admitted that he and Emily were indeed close that night in the car, but he sincerely tried to assure the court and everyone present that everything was consensual. The important fact, he said, was that when he brought Emily home, she was alive and well. The motion to compel specifies that Michael Nelletti voluntarily inflicted the victim with lacerations, abrasions, and contusions that resulted in her death, with severe acute external and internal bleeding and hemorrhagic shock as the cause of death, according to the autopsy report. Michael Nelletti's evidence made no impression on the court or those in the audience. On March 14, 2024, Michael Nelletti, 36, was sentenced to 20 years in prison. Brian Smith, Michael Nelletti's cousin, was charged with accessory after the fact, was sentenced to 2 years. The loss of Emily was an unbearable ache that tore through her parents in a way they couldn't fully comprehend. They had loved her deeply, fiercely, and unconditionally. To them, she had always been more than just a daughter. She was their joy, their hope, the child they had raised with care, with high expectations, and with a sense of protection that came from their strict yet nurturing love. They had worked tirelessly to give her everything they thought she needed: a stable home, a solid education, and a future that would set her up for success. But all that seemed so irrelevant now. What good were their efforts when it hadn't been enough to protect her, to save her from whatever dark moment had led to this tragic end? Her mother's heart was heavy with guilt and disbelief. In her mind, she replayed every moment, every interaction with Emily, searching for signs she might have missed, for anything she could have done differently. Was there something more she could have said? Had she been too strict, too demanding, too blind to her daughter's inner world? She had always thought Emily would come to her with her troubles. After all, wasn't that what a mother was for? To be the safe space, the steady anchor in a storm? But now, in the haunting silence after her daughter's death, she realized just how little she truly knew about Emily's inner life. The walls of their home, built from love and discipline, had somehow turned into walls that kept them apart when it mattered most. And now it was too late to change that. Her father, too, was broken. He had always been the protector, the strong one. But now, that strength felt hollow, like it had crumbled beneath the weight of his own helplessness. He wondered, in the quietest moments of his grief, whether his attempts to control Emily's world, to shield her from harm by setting strict boundaries, had only made her feel more alone. If only he had given her more room to breathe, to talk, to express her pain without fear of disappointing him or her mother. His love had been a fortress, but perhaps it had become a prison for her instead. The thought that he might have contributed, even in the smallest way, to her decision to hide her struggles from them was a bitter pill he couldn't swallow. Together, Emily's parents were left to grapple with a loss that defied all understanding. The girl they had raised, the girl they had nurtured with their dreams and hopes for the future, was gone. And the worst part was, they didn't even get the chance to say goodbye. The silence that had surrounded Emily in her final hours was a painful echo of the silence that had surrounded them all these years. The things they never said, the questions they never asked, had cost them everything. Their grief wasn't just for the daughter they lost, but for the daughter they never truly knew. They mourned the missed opportunities, the conversations they never had, the moments they could have shared, the times they could have shown more patience, more understanding. In the quiet aftermath, they were left with nothing but regret and the deep, gnawing feeling that somehow, in their love for her, they had failed her. Every day, they would remember Emily. The way she smiled when she was happy, the way her eyes lit up when she talked about something she was passionate about. But now, those memories felt like ghosts, haunting them in their every waking moment. The weight of the loss pressed down on them, a constant reminder of what they had lost, and the words that had gone unsaid, the help they never knew she needed. In their grief, they realized the fragility of life, the fragility of their relationships, their parenting, and their understanding of one another. They had loved Emily with all their hearts, but it wasn't enough to shield her from the darkness she had faced, or to open the lines of communication that might have saved her. Now they were left to wonder if, in their efforts to protect her, they had inadvertently pushed her away when she needed them most. Her parents, overwhelmed by this loss, would carry it with them forever. A loss of a daughter they had adored, a loss of trust, a loss of connection. And most painfully of all, the knowledge that they had loved Emily with everything they had, yet it had still not been enough to keep her safe. Emily's mother said she regretted letting her daughter go out with her so-called friends. Emily's family expressed their hope that cases of this nature will not be repeated. With the pain of parents who can never come to terms with their daughter's death, they said, it is their turn to fight for justice. A story that began as a fun evening out with a visit to the beach turned into a night of terror that cost the life of Emily Garvoss, who bled to death after lacerations, abrasions, and bruises inflicted by a man whose parents are entrusted with the lives of their children. Obviously, everyone involved in the evening's outing has a share of blame. Unfortunately, because of her parents' excessive strictness, Emily was afraid to ask them for help and tell them what had happened. Sometimes we think that it is easier to conceal because of fear of punishment. True friendship is a complex and multifaceted concept, and in the case of this tragic event, the actions, or lack thereof, of the group of friends speak volumes about what it means to be a true friend. A true friend, in the most ideal sense, is someone who acts with care, loyalty, and responsibility, particularly in times of crisis. They are people who not only share the good moments but also step up when things go wrong. They are the ones who step in when someone is in danger or trouble, offering help, comfort, and support without hesitation. However, in this story, the actions of the group raise difficult questions about what true friendship really means. The decision to stay silent, to ignore the warning signs, and ultimately to not seek medical help for Emily reveals a deeper, uncomfortable truth about the nature of some relationships. It suggests that friendship, for some, may not be as unconditional or as pure as we hope it to be. Perhaps, in this case, the group valued their own safety, reputation, and comfort more than the well-being of one of their own. The reluctance to intervene stems not from a lack of care for Emily, but from fear of getting involved, fear of facing consequences, and the weight of self-preservation. The girl who witnessed the man putting pills in the drink and chose to remain silent reflects another side of friendship, the passive observer who does not wish to disrupt the social dynamics or create a conflict. Her silence might stem from a belief that it is not her responsibility to intervene, or perhaps she thought that Emily was consenting to the situation. She may have rationalized that Emily knew what was going on, that Emily was capable of making her own choices, or even that it wasn't her place to interfere in someone else's relationship. In the end, she remains complicit in Emily's fate, despite her inaction. The question of whether true friendship exists becomes even murkier when we consider the group's overall inaction. Did they fail to act because they didn't truly care, or was it because they simply didn't want to face the consequences? If true friendship is defined by support in times of need, then these friends fell short. They were bound by a superficial camaraderie, but in the face of real danger, they lacked the courage and compassion to do what was necessary. In this way, friendship becomes a lens through which we see human behavior at its most vulnerable, highlighting how easily moral and ethical lines can blur when self-interest is involved. Ultimately, this story leaves us questioning the strength and authenticity of friendship. Can a bond be called true when it is tested by fear, self-preservation, or the avoidance of discomfort? Can we truly call someone our friend if, when the chips are down, they choose to remain passive, to let another suffer in silence? These are the kinds of hard-hitting questions that this story brings to light, forcing us to reflect on the meaning of friendship and whether we are ever truly capable of being there for others when it matters most. True friendship, perhaps, is not just about shared moments of joy, but about showing up, even when it's difficult, uncomfortable, or risky. And it is in these moments of choice that the true nature of friendship is revealed. The dilemma faced by Emily in this situation speaks to the delicate and often painful dynamic between strict parents and their children. In many households, especially those with rigid rules and high expectations, children may feel a deep sense of fear or discomfort when it comes to confronting their parents about difficult or sensitive issues. This fear of punishment, judgment, or simply the dreaded earful often results in silence, even when speaking up could potentially save their lives. In Emily's case, the bleeding and her overall condition were obvious signs of distress, yet she chose not to speak up when she arrived home. Her mother, assuming it was simply her menstrual cycle, didn't question her further. This lack of inquiry, though it might seem benign on the surface, reflects a broader pattern of misunderstandings that can arise in homes with strict parenting styles. Parents may become accustomed to thinking they know their children's lives, believing that they are in control and fully aware of what is happening, all while missing the signs of deeper issues. For Emily, however, the silence wasn't just about avoiding an uncomfortable conversation. It was about survival. The fear of reprimand or punishment could have been overwhelming, especially in a household where strict discipline and high expectations set the tone for all interactions. Emily may have already known that her parents would react negatively, perhaps even with anger or disappointment, to the truth of what had happened. She might have feared that revealing the details of the night would only lead to a harsh lecture about poor judgment, her lack of control, or even worse, an invasion of her privacy that she didn't want. In some cases, children who grow up under strict parental control learn to hide things not out of a desire to deceive, but out of a need to maintain peace and avoid emotional conflict. They internalize the message that to be honest, to show vulnerability or weakness, is to invite criticism. In such an environment, speaking up can feel like an admission of failure, an act of rebellion, or a way to invite even stricter punishment. Therefore, Emily's choice to stay silent isn't a reflection of apathy toward her own well-being, but rather a response to the ingrained fear of what might happen if she tells the truth. The dilemma here is multifaceted. Emily's fear of her parents' strictness not only keeps her silent about what happened that night, but also deepens her sense of isolation. She's left to deal with the physical and emotional aftermath of a traumatic event without any support system. And worse, she's convinced that opening up will only make things worse. The silence becomes a coping mechanism, albeit a destructive one, as she navigates an environment that feels like it demands perfection and punishes vulnerability. The tragedy of Emily's situation lies in the realization that her silence was not just a passive response to fear, but tragic consequence of the communication gap between strict parents and their children. In households where there is little room for mistakes or open dialogue, children can feel trapped in a cycle of hiding their struggles in order to avoid conflict, when, in reality, what they might need most is compassion, understanding, and a space to be open and honest without the fear of being reprimanded or misunderstood. In the end, Emily's silence becomes a reflection of a larger issue: the impact that rigid parental control can have on a child's ability to express themselves, especially when they are in a vulnerable position. What might have started as a small act of avoidance grows into a tragedy, and the lack of communication between Emily and her parents ultimately leaves her isolated in her suffering. It underscores the importance of fostering an environment where children feel they can come to their parents with their problems, knowing they will be met with understanding rather than harsh judgment, a lesson that could have potentially saved Emily's life. It is a pity that in this battle, fear wins, taking a precious life. Thank you for being with us on this episode of Tom's True Crime. If you are interested in more in-depth investigations into the most perplexing crimes, be sure to like and subscribe to our channel. What are your thoughts about this case? Please share them with us in the comments below. Until next time, stay safe.